Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a few seconds. Thank you for joining us. We'll give it about a minute, actually, before me and Dr. Erica Walker get started with the first unscripted conversations about the future of research, but we want to give folks time to get settled in, get comfortable. Hopefully, we'll be having a really interesting to watch conversation as we talk about the future of health. So yeah, we'll get started in a little bit. I'm going to just wait a couple more seconds, but grateful for everyone for being here. In the spirit of unscripted, Dr. Erica Walker, do you want to say anything before we officially get the unscripted conversation going?
No, thank you all for joining us. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you, Lil, and I'm just very excited to talk.
Me too. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, Kualito Nati, Lil Milagro Henriquez, welcome to Unscripted, Conversations about the Future of Research. This is the first episode of a week-long series, so we hope you'll join us every single day as we unfold this really exciting lineup of conversations and thinking. And I'm Lil Milagro Henriquez. I'm the founder and executive director of Mycelium Youth Network. Mycelium prepares young people for climate change and for a climate challenged future through climate adaptation and mitigation education and gaming. I'm also a mother, descendant of detribalized Nahuatl Pipil peoples, youth ally, proud Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area resident, and an avid gamer. And I'm super excited to kick the series off with Dr. Erica Walker, whose work focuses on environmental exposure assessments, modeling, and community surveying, as well as fostering community engagement. She runs the Community Noise Lab at Brown University, which is dedicated to exploring the holistic relationship between community noise and health. And we're so excited to be here today. So thank you for joining us. We are streaming right now on both LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live. So wherever you're joining from, we are super glad to have you here. And this event is being recorded and will be shared out later today. Also, I want to give a huge shout out to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with one another and to think about the ways that we can improve our society and how we're using knowledge as a way to better public health. And while I'm going to be in conversation with Dr. Walker, I also invite folks to be in conversation with one another through comments and through the chats. So one of the questions that I always love to start with is like, where are you joining from? And that's not the one I like. What are you joining from is the standard one, just so you can get a sense of who's in the room and where they're coming from. But the exciting one is what movements have inspired your thinking around health and equity, or around health equity. So it could either be one of those two things. As you're sharing, though, I always want to remind folks to keep in mind our community guidelines. So refrain from discussing election campaigns, candidates, or political party platforms. But yes, be able to share opinions, ask tough questions of one another and of us. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if there's something that comes up that feels really interesting or exciting, we definitely want to be able to bring that into the room. So, and also before we get started, one of the amazing new initiatives or exciting new initiatives that Robert Wood Johnson is coming up with is the Put It on a Shirt campaign. So if you hear anything that me and Erica are saying that you're like, oh my God, that could be a quote, or that could be something that I want to see in a shirt, feel free to drop that in the chat and let us know. Just say shirt and we'll, and then the quote, and then we'll make sure that we can add it. And then hopefully you can see somebody in your neighborhood wearing it later on in the week or in the month or in the year, and you can know that they were also part of this conversation. So Robert Wood Johnson will design one really cool shirt from each of our episodes of Unscripted, and they will be available to order starting tomorrow. So I believe that's all of the logistical housekeeping stuff. So let's start the conversation. So I've been really excited to have this conversation with Dr. Erica Walker since reading your bio and seeing all the work that you're doing. And then the excitement just continued to build the more I started reading about your interviews, like the way that you're thinking about the work, your shift. I know we had an amazing conversation for folks that don't know at Pop Tech a couple of weeks ago in DC, which was really exciting about the future of research. And, before we really kind of dive into the future of research, one of the things that caught me a lot of what you were saying was just your history and your past and growing up in the Deep South. I grew up in the Deep South. I grew up in Louisiana, New Orleans, Louisiana. And I think that we have a tendency to really kind of, in thinking about the future of research, to make it all future focused without that recognition that so much of our present and our future is determined by what has happened in the past and how we can address it thoughtfully and with a lot of care. And I love how you talk about your work, growing up, and how that then pushed you in the work that you do now. So I was hoping to just start off with having you share a little bit out about your work, and then hopefully I'll share out what inspired me also as a person growing up in the Deep South. But I'd love for you to share out how that's influenced you and what that's looked like.
No, I'm so excited to be talking to you again, Lil. Thank you for the great introduction. So, I hate to say this because I'm in academia now, but I feel very fortunate that I didn't grow up in academia. I didn't have any family members or relatives that were in academia. It was not on my bucket list of things to accomplish. So I felt like I've always been able to kind of have that outsider perspective when dealing with the issues that I'm seeing now in communities. So I felt like because I didn't have the academic silver spoon in my mouth, I'm able to kind of be true to who I am. I grew up in the Deep South. I grew up in extreme poverty. And I grew up with people coming around and saying they cared about me. And the extent of them saying that they cared about me was a survey, maybe $10 or $15 for completing the survey, and then we would never hear from them again. And I also felt like when people cared about me growing up in that environment was when they wanted me to focus on their agendas. So I knew two things. I wasn't a person that would go into communities to extract data without giving back. And I always knew that I wanted to work on issues that were relevant to the community and leave behind tangible and impactful tools and resources for continued advocacy. So I went to school to be I'm an artist. I was an artist before I got into all of this, And so I felt like those childhood experiences, my experiences as being a working artist for a large part of my life, have led me to really think about the future of health in a very different way than a traditional academic would, even though I am very much an academic now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I grew up in some of that resonates. Obviously, we grew up in two different states because you grew up in Mississippi, but I would vacation in Mississippi all the time because I also grew up super working class and grew up in a really small community. And so we would often, when we had to go on vacation, my mom was like, it has to be somewhere between where we can leave the house and we have to be able to come back that same day because we can't afford hotels or motels or anything like that. And so, and growing up for me, in Louisiana, in Southern Louisiana, and I would spend some time in New Orleans with my dad and sometimes in Avondale with my mom, just having the sense of not feeling connected to the environment and not feeling connected to what was happening. Because we were really, really insular in Avondale, especially when I was with my mom, and I grew up most of the time with my mom, and feeling things were just I didn't have say or direction in what was happening. My mom didn't feel, especially as an immigrant, she had say and direction. She's like, well, people out there are doing stuff for us and it'll work out if it works out. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And she really had to fight to put herself through school. And so it was a struggle for me to even get to college and to make sure that I had the ability to be able to work in the high pressure university environment, which I hadn't been trained for necessarily when I was growing up. And so, and I think it was, and also seeing the ways in which just environmental racism meant that we had all of these toxic things by our home pretty consistently, because I grew up in a predominantly working class community of color area or in working white poor area. And so thinking about how, and just noticing that, but not feeling like I could ever change it or do anything about it. It was just the reality. And so like that imagination for me growing up, like wasn't even there of like what I could do. And it wasn't until for me, like I went into my undergrad, which was at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I started like organizing. And I know you have an organizing background too, or community organizing background, that I was like, oh, actually, we can do things. And if you get enough people together, we can actually transform our communities. And then, yeah, that like for me was like one of those like transition points, like that aha moment. Oh my God, I have actually power to be able to transform my world through community organizing. I'd love to hear a little bit if you are open to sharing about your community organizing, because I know that I've read it in different interviews.
So my community organizing first started out as very selfish intentions. I was an artist and I was living in a basement apartment and in the city of Boston, and I just remember I had these neighbors. Like I never really paid attention to my upstairs neighbors until a new family moved in and they had two small kids. And those kids used to run across their floor, which was my ceiling, for like 24 hours a day. And that was my office space. That was my home space. So that was the only place I had to go. And so selfishly, I wanted to get them evicted. So I was like, how could I? Like I started collecting evidence on trying to I started calling the police, collecting evidence. I was trying to get them evicted or take them to small claims court. So in that process, I sort of organized myself to collect data and to do some research on how to get loud upstairs neighbors out of my life. And in the process of doing the research, I realized that there were other people in cities that were impacted by upstairs or downstairs neighbors. Then there were people in communities near airports. Then there were people in communities near industrial operations. Then there are communities of people near highways. And so I was like, wow, there's a whole bunch of other communities that are just like me, suffering from noise in their environments. And I wonder, is in the end, will the payoff be more if I focus on all of these things as in comparison to just focusing on myself? And of course, I wasn't the most like successful artist. I was a starving artist. And so so it made it easier to be like, hey, go to graduate school, try to figure this out. And so, I started from there. But then as I went to graduate school and start learning about environmental health, then I started talking to people about their community noise issues. That sort of led to that organizing. But I'm not going to sit up here on the internet and lie and say that I started all of this with good intentions, because I definitely did not.
No, but I feel like you started with relevance to yourself. And that so much of like community organizing actually starts off with like, hey, this one thing is affecting me. What can we do about it? And then like kind of going over casting the circle like wider and wider and wider until it's like, okay, actually, how do we think about like noise pollution? So I think that totally makes sense. I think it's
So can I
would say like selfish. I think it's like human nature to be like, how can I better the environment that I'm in, and what do I need to do? And how does research support in that?
It was, how can I put them in small claims court and get like $5,000 to move on with my life? Like I said, I'm dead. But do you mind me asking you a question? Do you mind me asking you a question? So like, what was your first organizing experience? Like when did what kicked it off?
Yeah, it was an undergrad. I was at CU Boulder, the University of Colorado at Boulder, which was a fairly like white environment. It was like 80 at the time. I think it's still like this now, but it's like 89% of the student body was like white and upper middle class. And I was coming in as a like very working class, trying to figure out like my queerness, trying to rebel, but also grew up really Catholic, and like into an environment where I was like, okay, education is supposed to help us better the world, because that's what I had been told my entire life, and the value my family put on education. And I remember being at this school and feeling very, very, very different from like everyone else around me. And feeling like there wasn't like a safe space where like I can actually like process what it was like for me, and try to like keep up with like a demanding workload, because I wasn't coming necessarily from the best high school either. And so and like through that process, I remembered feeling really alone, and then actually starting to like talk to like my roommates and people on the dorm, and seeing that like and gravitating towards the other, like people of color, predominantly like women of color that were in the space, to be like, what's, like, what can we do to like band together? Because I think you might have an experience that's not exactly like mine, but may have some similarities. And how do we survive in this environment that is not made for us, right? And I remembered like being invited to like one of the first meetings for like the Feminist Student Network and the Women's Resource Center, and just starting to think about, oh, there's actually an entire world of research and academia that was out there that actually was designed by people that are like, have not my exact life struggle, but so similar. And I felt for like the first time really seen, right? And so, like really getting into a lot of like Black feminist thought, Latinx feminist thought, like queer thought, starting to discover my indigeneity, learning about what that has looked like. And all of it though was like really designed around like, how do we make the world a better place? Like this feels unjust. How do we create justice from this situation? And we do it not necessarily by like tearing down systems. This is like, what I was thinking, what I was going through at the time, but like, how do we do it by creating something that feels exciting and livable and thriving? How do we create a thriving environment for us? And so my undergrad was in women's studies and political science with a minor in ethnic studies. And when I got out of college, I started linking that to like the Justice for Janitors movement. And my mom had cleaned houses, my dad had cleaned houses, I'd gone with them cleaning houses. And so saying like, how do we better the lives of folks that like have very similar history to like my community and my family? And then it's been actually like in moments of like resistance and organizing and like, how do we, demand better wages, all that stuff, that I first started to feel like really powerful and like there's actually something here. And so, so it was, and like feel like really rooted in purpose. And I hadn't felt that before, which is very like, sad slightly to my mom, who just wanted me to like become a lawyer or a doctor or something that was like traditional. And I was like, no, I think there's something here in this like justice framework.
Like, so I was thinking about you organizing for the janitors, and I just think that, if that was an exercise that didn't come from an organic place, if academia rewrote that, it would be like, oh, we need a population of janitors because it sounds sexy on a grant application, and we're going to set the agenda. So we know that they're funding stuff on some sort of chemical that they're exposed to, so that's going to be the relevant thing, and we're going to not think about anything else in their lives that could be important to the link between what we're investigating. We're not going to examine that. We're just going to set the agenda. And that's kind of like what I'm running away from in academia, where we use advocacy as a way to write like grants, or we use, like activism, advocacy as a way to write grants, but we really don't think about and deeply about the communities that we're supposed to be advocating for. And so for me, I just am at a crossroads in my life where I'm questioning everything around that, especially when we're in a very public facing. I mean, I'm in public health, and like I just had my my annual review, and I just remember they're like, okay, what do you have? Why is this work important? And they were just listing all of these things. None of it had to do with advocacy. None of it had to do with leaving communities better than we started when we first worked with them. None of them were interested in hearing about the lived experiences. Like none of that mattered. They're like, how many publications do you have? And I'm like, it's public health. Why are we not thinking about why are we only thinking about publication? So as I always say, it's not public health. I mean, it's not publication health, it's public health. And so it's just like one of those things so I'm just thinking about how academia would be, especially public health academia would be if we started from these organic origins. What would our work be like?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And I think and I certainly saw that in so much of my career in like different nonprofit spaces. So I was with Justice for Janitors. I've been in the nonprofit space for like 20 years. And whenever there were, exactly like you were saying, these connections to like academia, it would be people coming in and saying like, here's the research that I need to do, like fit yourself within the research that I need to do. And there wasn't any like give or take, or like, but what does this actually mean for our community? Or what are things that we can pull away? Like, how are you not just extracting knowledge from us and from our communities? Like, how are we actually gaining from this as like an experience? And I felt it so deeply in so many of my jobs. And it reminds me also of like this moment I was in when I was in El Salvador, because my family is from El Salvador, Cuzatlan, and doing work with like Nahuatl Pipil peoples, which is like how I identify, like, you know, them talking to us about how scholars from the US would come and like study them. And then they could literally point to different half constructed buildings and say like, this is when this person was trying to get money for this, and this is how far it went. Or like, here's a school that never finished getting built because the funding ran out. And as soon as the funding ran out, the people were gone. And so, you know, and so thinking about like, what does it mean to have, and it feels like really basic, but like, what does it mean to have research that is actually about benefiting people's lives? Exactly like you're saying, like, what if we actually started from people's lives and had that actually inform research? And how, while it feels really basic, I know that that's not how financial, like, university systems are set up or found, because everything is like define it in advance and then like work backwards, you know? And so thinking about like, how could the, you know, the future of health be just actually, what is the research that is making our lives better? And how are the communities themselves defining what the better looks like?
Yes, yes. And unfortunately, you know, I learned about these things much later on in my life. Like I didn't think about any of these things until I was in my 30s, right? Like that's when I started to even think about a future of anything
Mhm.
until I was like 30. So what I really like about your work is that you're thinking about getting people to think about these things very early in their lives. And so I really admire that because I was like, wow, if I would have met you when I was, you know, 10 or 11, I would be a completely different person because I would have had the knowledge and the awareness and the empowerment to feel like I had a voice much earlier than 30 years old when I decided to go back to graduate school and do this academic career. So in
Yeah.
addition to that organic activism, letting young people know that they too can participate, and you don't have to have this, you don't have to have a checkbox of things to be an advocate, to be an activist in your community. And you can work on problems that matter to you.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that that's for us, like at Mycelium, like one of the things we say often is if young people are young enough to, if kids are young enough to experience something, they should be given the language to how to understand it. And
Yes.
ideally, then after understanding, like, well, what is the world they want to build after it? And so, you know, so much of Mycelium, well, for people in the audience that don't know, so much of Mycelium's work is around climate adaptation and mitigation, and then saying, okay, actually, what is, if young people are the ones that are going to experience the most climate, you know, catastrophes, disasters, whatever issues in the next X amount of years, then how do we actually resource young people to tell us what feels important to them in our response to it? How do we give them, our program is entirely climate adaptation and mitigation, education, and gaming, and environmental justice gaming. But like, how do they have the tools to say, actually, this is what success looks like. This is what I need as a young person to feel prepared. Because at the beginning of Mycelium, part of what we were doing was like that place as adults saying, here's what we think and young people need to know around climate change. Here's what it means to, you know, learn about defensible space. Here's what it means to learn about air purification. And we were setting the agenda. And there was a moment with like one of our staff members who was in their early 20s, and they're like, actually, like, if we're actually saying that we're youth allies, shouldn't we actually be giving youth the tools to tell us how well we're doing? Like, how do we flip that institutional infrastructural power? And it was another one of those aha moments for like us as an org. We're like, actually, you're completely right. Otherwise, we're only having a level of like knowledge that is us to them versus like having them co-create the knowledge with us that they need to be able to feel prepared across all of our programmatic levels. And I know that you're doing that with both high school students, but also community college students, which is super exciting. My husband works at a community college. And he loves working with community college students. He's taught at like universities before. He's like, no, this is where it's at. He's like, this is the work. These are people that are like, yes, let's change our communities, that are like connected to community, connected to families and histories and all that stuff. So I'd love to hear about how you're bringing high school and college students into the work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, I grew up in poverty in Mississippi. And so it was either you go work at the light bulb plant or you go and get a degree in the community colleges. So my first experience into higher education was a community college. And like it's it's so funny. Like a lot of my work is in Mississippi. And so when you think about having these grants and you're like, hey, we're going to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, especially with me, air pollution, noise pollution, water quality, Mississippi is not as sufficiently resourced as Boston, where I got my education from. And so, I can't say that, oh, I'm going to have all of these people who are literally right down the hall from me, who are experts in their field. In Mississippi, I can't say that these people are going to be, I can rely on these people to help me on my grant or to help me on my research. In Mississippi, there's limited infrastructure. So I had to kind of MacGyver my way through how to make this work. So it's like, what are the institutions that are reliable, accessible, and ready and willing to jump on these problems and most connected to the community? And for me, it was obvious it was community colleges. And so I feel like they're often left out of the conversation when
Mhm.
it comes to research. I mean, we don't think about them as being research institutions, but they have labs, they have professors, they
Mhm.
have undergraduate students, but no one thinks about them. So a large part of my work is in infrastructure that is there
Mhm.
and making it work. And I just really like working with community college students because you just get a diverse set of students with all kinds of experiences. And for me, I just like that energy. I love that energy. And like I said, they're super connected with the community in a way that I'm not. And they have insights
Mhm.
into what is important. And so for me, I just love working with community colleges, and we all together, we measure air pollution, we measure noise pollution, they do research. It's just been a fantastic experience. And like I say, working in Mississippi as a person born and raised in Mississippi, I know that a successful grant is knowing how to, or a successful research is knowing how to leverage the infrastructure that is there and making it work.
Yeah. No, I like that. And it also feels like it's just creating accessibility to like knowledge production in a really exciting way. Cause I think that exactly like you're saying, like there's not that much resources, especially like in rural communities and environments. And also like in, I think a lot of community colleges, like there's folks don't take them as seriously. And so they're not brought in to do the kind of knowledge production that why wouldn't they be able to do? Like it's such a almost like a very classist question of like who gets access to becoming knowledge producers and who doesn't, right? And so seeing the ways that they were able to like come in and be able to collect information and data about community and like all you were saying, I feel like is really, really exciting. And you have worked also with high school students, right? I'm remembering that correctly? Okay.
Absolutely. So yeah, we continue to work with high school students. So the one thing that I find really interesting is that um, who listens to who. So when I was in Mississippi, born and raised in Mississippi, but I went away, came up to Boston. Now I have a Yankee accent, so I'm now I have lost my connection to the soil. And so when I come to Mississippi and I talk about, hey, you had a water crisis, let me test your water, like this is, let's organize around this. People are like, who are you? And I'm like, I know your mom, but they're still like, who are you? Because I look and sound different. But with high school students, I find that they are a powerful vehicle of knowledge generation and knowledge transfer. And so like, for example, with the water testing that we're doing in Mississippi, that is a laboratory that is 100% driven by high school students. They put on the events, they test the water, they create the reports, they give everything back. And so when it comes to building trust in the water system, I don't know if you guys know this, but Jackson, Mississippi had a collapse in their water system. And so nobody's trusting anybody. No one trusts the mayor. No one trusts the third-party manager because the city of Jackson lost control of its water system. No one trusts me because I'm just an academic who has no connections anymore. I lost my Southern accent. But the entity that they were able to trust was their kids, who, when they tested their water and they were like, Mom, Dad, your water is safe to drink. They believe that source. So not only are youth young and they're going to be our future, they are excellent knowledge generators and they're excellent science communicators, and they're trusted, and they're not jaded by they're not jaded by life. And we owe it to them to continue to not let them be jaded. We owe it to them to create a world where they feel like they can thrive and grow and produce something of value to their community. So I especially like working with high school students in all of my work, because they are our future. And I'm not trying to sound like a Whitney Houston song, but they, like I said, they're trusted communicators, and I feel like I wouldn't be able to do my work without them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's also like, when part of, when we think about Mycelium and the work we do with youth is like, if we actually want to transform culture, if we want to transform society, like in a large way, you start with the young people, right? Because so many great movements have started with young people recently. And so thinking about what does it mean to be able to give them the tools to feel powerful, especially at a high school age. And also, especially at an age where youth feel like they're not jaded, but they're also like, okay, I want to see what you have. Like, you have to like win trust. You move at the speed of trust with like youth, and especially high school students, and they will tell you in detail when you are not when you are not on point, when you are not talking to them in a way that is understandable. And that could actually be that, at least like Mycelium has made it to where like we have to be really on top of our stuff. We have to have all of our, like, way more than a funder, way more than like, another org, where like if our young people can't trust us, then they will let us know, and then they will like vote with their feet. They'll walk out, right? Like they were like, I'm not gonna be a part of this thing anymore. And so being able to like make that connection to support them in becoming like knowledge producers can then transform communities. Because you're right, then that's how parents listen. Like if my kid tells me something, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna listen. All right. And like I understand, because like they're quick to question and to like push back, as well they should be, when things feel unjust for them.
Exactly. And as a researcher in academia, we're sort of brainwashed into thinking that we gain that trust and we gain that access because we have an SCD and an MSc behind our names. Like that's supposed to just magically open the doors. So I just feel like, like our investing, there's something so important about investing our time and energy and resources into our young people, because you said this, I'm stealing your words here. They're going to inherit everything that we've done right or we've done wrong. And for me, that's very scary, but it's also very inspiring. So I know that when I think about my work in academia, I kind of keep that in the back of my mind. Like I'm creating I'm creating a series of things. I don't know what other thing to call it, but things that someone's going to inherit. And I want to make sure that I leave behind something. Like I don't want to, I just want to leave behind something that they can take and move on. And I also want them to be skeptical. I think now when, like, we also work in Mississippi with communities that are impacted by industrial pollution. And, a lot of industrial companies come into the communities, they come into poor communities, vulnerable communities, and they're like, hey, we're going to open up shop here, we're going to pollute, and we're going to give you a job. But I want the students to have had the experience of collecting data, testing soil, or testing air pollution, or measuring noise. And I want them to have the confidence to demand something, right? Because I was poor and growing up, I just thought that we were just supposed to be there and take the world as it is. But no, that's probably why it took me forever to actually get into this work. But I also want to create students and create a future that's skeptical and that asks questions and that just doesn't take things as they are. I want them to challenge the system.
Yeah, I love that. And I like how so much of your research and the work that you're doing with students is about creating solutions to challenges that they're facing. Because we can do all the research in the world, and if it doesn't have any impact, or if it's just going to go into some um, like research journal that like maybe 5 people read, that like people have to pay for to be able to get through a paywall, then like what does it actually matter? Like at the end of the day, and this is like a good chunk of why I left academia. That's why I have an ABT next to my PhD, was when I was all but dissertation. And I was like, wait, so what does it actually matter if I have a degree in systematic theology if like the climate crisis is coming? Like, what does that actually matter? Like, how is this research that I'm doing and building actually improving daily lives of people? How am I thinking like an ancestor? That's a powerful saying I like learned when I was in New Zealand, is people with consistency like, are you thinking like an ancestor? And it was a way in like Maori culture, and people were like, oh, I'm not, or oh, I am. Okay, like what am I doing to safeguard the future? And so I just love so much the way that your research is like fundamentally like rooted in how is this helping better people's lives. And so I know you talked a little bit about the air pollution piece and other work that you do. I would just love to hear more about like your solutions based, like how are you thinking about research that is improving, and how have you seen that like play out in community outside of just the research space itself? Because when I think about your work, I think about it in terms of like what ripple effect is it creating across an entire community?
So, unfortunately, I study noise pollution primarily, but if, as you see, like there's things been tacked on, like water quality. I'm not a water quality expert, or soil quality, or air pollution. I'm not an air pollution expert, but I started and cut my teeth on a daily basis on community noise issues. But during COVID was like a very eye-opening experience for me, especially in public health. I think COVID, but I hate to say this, but I think COVID was one of those time periods where I really had to question my role in public health. And so I think that one of the things that I have struggled with is like being being meaningful, right? So like during COVID, public health, we were encouraging people to get vaccinated. We were encouraging people to do all of these things, but we weren't listening to communities when they're saying, we would like to do those things. We would like some more information. We would like some time to have trust, to build trust in this. And also, like, we don't have money. Like, I work, I can't take off time to go get vaccinated, or like in Jackson, Mississippi, there's a water crisis. I don't even have clean water. Like my kids can't even go to school because our water's not clean, but you want me to prioritize this. So I think the biggest thing that we don't value in academia, but is of utmost importance, is working on problems that matter to the community, even if it betrays your expertise. So I came to Mississippi because I wanted to do Community Noise Lab Mississippi Edition. And as soon as I got into our first community meeting, they were like, we don't want to, we don't want anything to do with noise. Like that is like not even in our top 10 things of importance right now. We have a water crisis. We have failing infrastructure. The mayor is talking about 17 of our schools closing. None of the things that you're talking about are important to us. And I was like, well, what is important to you? And it was that question, the one that we're not really able to address nimbly in academia, because we have these grants and we have to do what we say that we're going to do. And they were like, we want you to focus on water quality. And so through that process, I learned that listening to the community in kind of checking my ego, checking my needs, gave me such an education where I learned how to develop relevant tools that are necessary. And I learned how to get people interested. They're like, wait, you're the water lady, but why is your lab called Community Noise Lab? Like, I'm glad you asked. We actually do noise pollution. What's noise pollution? Oh, like, do you test that too? Oh my gosh. So we can still do what we need to do, but I think that that doing it in a way that matters to the community is of utmost importance, because otherwise we're going to get people to fill out the survey like I did when I was a kid because they paid $15. We're never going to get anybody invested in the sustainability of whatever we're
That's
doing. And
yeah.
so I feel for me, it's like, so yeah, so for me, the most important thing is and when you're working on things that people care about, you really don't have to worry about anything else. And I think we in public health struggle because we don't really work on things that people care about. And we don't do it in a way that connects to people. And so
Mm.
we get all of this money, but we're not going to ever have any impact because no one wants to take the 60th food frequency questionnaire and give you samples of my saliva. Like, we're over that. We need something that can materially change our position. Like, we've been doing this research thing for hundreds of years. My community is still the same as it was for the past 70 or 80 years. What are we offering that's different? And I think that we in public health have failed the communities that we're supposed to serve in that way, in a very drastic way.
Yeah.
For me, it's criminal. It feels criminal.
Yeah. I feel like and I don't think it's just public health though. Like, I think it's across so many spectrums. And I think
Right.
it just feels makes one question whether the system was built for that. Because I think there's so much siloing that happens in academia and in other spaces that it feels, and there's very little like conversations that are happening across those things, right? And there's very little funding that's about like, how do we create cross collaborative conversations with like the things that like people in our community care about, the things that we care about, because what's that like middle ground space? And it feels like there's very little of that conversation happening. I think intentionally, but that's a whole different conversation. But like that is present, that like prevents communities from feeling powerful to transform their lives. And I know we're coming up on time. And I like one of the quotes I did want to end with, and get your final thought, Dr. Walker, is like one of my favorite quotes is this Raymond Williams quote that says like, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And I think about like hope as that active practice of transformation and of like leadership development, of empowerment. And that starts in our communities. And then we can think about other things. And then we can figure out all the other problems in the world. But if you can't get like these basic needs met, then how else are we supposed to vision or dream beyond that? But I'd love to also hear like, like closing thoughts from you, or like what's like one thing you wish you could speak into existence. And I realize the lights in the room have gone out and they're like motion detecting lights, but I'm gonna roll with it because I'm adaptive.
Otherwise you wouldn't be who you are. So I think that I would just really want to urge public health practitioners in particular. I have a narrow mindset because I'm in public health, to really question what we're doing. What are we doing? And are we doing a good job? And being honest about that answer. And if you're not doing a good job, don't outsource what you can't do to community organizations. Actually take a step back and evaluate, is what you're doing important? And if it's not, stop. And like, don't get in this hamster wheel of I gotta raise money, I gotta get grants, because what you're doing is you're literally polluting the communities with junk. And that's like it's no different than the illegal dumping communities that I have that I work with. So I really want to encourage public health practitioners to take a step back and ask yourself, are you hurting or harming? And if you like, I wish I could do like some academic flow chart, like, like those little flow charts, like, are you this? Yes, no. And it like tells you what to do. Because it's like, do you have to outsource your credibility to an organization to do your work? And if you have yes, it's like, support the community and take a back seat. But it's like, yes, I have to outsource them. And then I'm going to, like we go these other crazy things. So I think we have to ask ourselves, are we the ones that are doing the work or should be doing the work? And if we're not, empower the people who should do the work. That's people like you. That's like the children, the kids that you work with, and be okay with that. Because one thing that we don't need more of in this world is junk. And as academics, we put out a lot of junk in this world, and I'm over it. I'm totally over it.
I love that. That's a great way to close. Don't put out junk in it. That's also a good last call to drop any shirt ideas in the chat if you did have them. And just thank you so much, Dr. Walgrove. It's such a wonderful, wonderful conversation. For everybody that's watching us, please be on the lookout for an email later today with a recap, details for tomorrow, and how to get your free t-shirt while supplies last. They should be up and ready for tomorrow. And so thank you for joining us. And thank you again, Dr. Walker, and I'll be passing, I believe, the mic on to you for tomorrow's Unscripted event, and we'll drop the link in the chat to register.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so great seeing you again.
And then, did you want to talk to us about what's going to come tomorrow? What's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's unscripted, so we're going to ebb and flow. But I'm going to be talking to Dr. Mary Bassett, a woman that I have admired for many years from afar. And so I'm going to ask her some questions about our role in academia. I'm gonna dig in a little deeper, and I'm gonna be a little challenging on some things, but I know it's gonna be a great conversation because we think alike on so many ways. She's just a much more sophisticated thinker than I am, but it'll be good to kind of hear from a seasoned, amazing researcher. So we're gonna just kind of delve more deeply into the role of our roles in communities and thinking about ways that we can do things better.
Okay. Thank you. So it'll be the same time, same place, and a different link though for you to join us. And if you have any topics that you want us to talk about, or you want Erica to talk about tomorrow, you can email us at unscripted@rwjf.org. So thank you, everyone. Bye.